The war did not ask permission to enter the sky. It climbed there out of desperation, dragged upward by men who had already exhausted every way of killing on the ground. By 1914, the earth of Europe was saturated with death. Trenches carved the continent into wounds that never healed. Artillery shook the soil until it felt alive, screaming under steel. Millions of men lived and died without ever seeing the enemy who killed them. The sky, at first, was meant to watch. Aircraft were fragile contraptions of wood, wire, and fabric, engines coughing and stalling like unreliable hearts. They were not weapons. They were observers' eyes floating above a war that could no longer see itself. Pilots waved at one another when they passed. Some saluted. Others fired pistols out of curiosity. Not doctrine, gravity did most of the killing. Bullets were secondary. There were no parachutes. If the machine failed, the man followed it to the ground. The war rose into the air before men understood what it meant to fight there. Every flight was an experiment. Every engagement a lesson paid for in blood. Wings folded under stress. Engines caught fire. Aircraft disintegrated in mitre-like insects struck by unseen hands. Survival depended less on courage than on instinct and feeling when the machine was about to betray you. And yet, something changed. Once machine guns were synchronized to fire through spinning propellers, the sky ceased to be neutral. It became a hunting ground. Combat turned deliberate. Pilots began to seek one another, not out of chance, but intent. Dogfights spiraled into lethal choreography. Tight turns and sudden dives where a single burst of bullets meant obliteration. There was no armor, no escape, no forgiveness. It was the purest form of combat the war had produced. Anti-ground cavalry officers watched this transformation with growing bitterness. Horses were useless against machine guns. Charges dissolved into massacres. Tradition collapsed under modern firepower. The cavalry, once the symbol of speed and dominance, had become ceremonial. One of those officers was Manfred. He had been born for a different war. Raised in Prussian aristocracy, Richthofen learned discipline before empathy, precision before emotion. He hunted as a boy, not for sport, but for mastery tracking, waiting, choosing the exact moment to kill. Cavalry promised movement, control, honor. What he found instead was stagnation. Endless waiting, orders delayed, death delivered anonymously by artillery he never saw.
Legends are often born in moments where survival and death share the same sky. Manfred von Richthofen became known as the Red Baron not because he loved war, but because he mastered it. In an age where the air itself became a battlefield, skill meant life, and mistakes meant falling from the sky. This channel does not glorify aces or kill counts. We examine how myth is built, how fear spreads, and how single figures come to represent an entire war. I'm Reo, and here we don't just chase legends, we uncover the man behind the Red Wings.
The ground war disgusted him. Men died without agency, crushed by randomness. There was no skill in surviving a shell, no elegance in drowning in mud. Richthofen wanted clarity. He wanted to see his enemy. He wanted control over death, not submission to it, so way Luke had above the trenches, aircraft cut thin lines through the gray sky, detached from the chaos below. Their decisions still mattered. Skill still counted. A single man could still shape an outcome. Richthofen transferred to the air service, not out of romance, but frustration. At first, he was not a pilot. He was an observer, seated behind another man, scanning the earth through binoculars, sketching troop movements, watching explosions bloom far below. It was informative. It was not satisfying. He wanted more than observation. He wanted authorship, so he learned to fly. Flying then was not bravery, it was attrition. Engines failed without warning. Controls stiffened in cold air. A moment's inattention meant death. Richthofen adapted not through daring, but method. He studied the machine the way he once studied prey. He memorized its limits. He learned when it would forgive and when it would not. When he finally began to fight, he did so differently. Others chased targets wildly, firing from poor angles, burning fuel and nerve. Richthofen waited. He stalked, he closed distance, until escape was impossible. Then he fired with restraint and precision. His first kill did not intoxicate him. It instructed him. He analyzed it afterward. What position had worked? What angle? How the enemy reacted? He treated killing as a craft, not a thrill. Victory followed repetition. Repetition bred mastery. As the months passed, the numbers grew. 5 kills. 10. 20. Each confirmed that something rare had emerged in the sky. A man built for a war no one had prepared for. Then he made a decision that should have ended his life. He painted his aircraft red. In a sky filled with smoke and camouflage, the color was obscene bright, unmistakable, defiant. It rejected concealment entirely. It announced presence. It should have drawn every gun toward him. Instead, it drew fear. Enemy pilots began to recognize it from a distance. The red aircraft meant something specific. This fight would not be random. This fight would be unequal. Some turned away before engagement. Others chased recklessly, desperate to be the one who killed him. Few succeeded. Richthofen understood something fundamental about warfare that generals on the ground still struggled to grasp. The battle begins before the first shot. By making himself visible, he controlled the psychology of the encounter. The red plane was not vanity. It was dominance. In the gray skies of Europe, red came to mean death. Germany recognized his value immediately. The empire was starving, blockaded, bleeding slowly toward collapse. It needed symbols untouched by mud and decay. Richthofen was perfect, aristocratic, lethal, clean. Newspapers turned him into legend. Posters celebrated his victories. Children learned his name before they understood the war. He was no longer just a pilot. He was a weapon, and weapons are not allowed to rest. The transformation was complete long before anyone admitted it. Richthofen no longer flew as a man alone in the sky. He flew as an institution. Orders bent around him. Squadrons reorganized themselves according to his methods. Younger pilots watched not with admiration, but with dependence. He did not encourage heroics. He discouraged them. Stay together. Protect each other. Attack only when advantage is absolute. Survival was not cowardice. It was discipline. He was not trying to be immortal. He was trying to be efficient. As aerial warfare matured, the sky filled with faster machines and deadlier men. The romantic illusion of chivalry evaporated quickly. There were no bows, no salutes, no courtesy once bullets began to fly. Dogfights became violent mathematics altitude. Speed, angle, timing. Richthofen thrived because he reduced chaos into rules. The war below remained madness. Trenches consumed entire divisions without meaning. Artillery erased villages whose names no one remembered. Infantry advanced meters at the cost of thousands. The air, by contrast, still allowed clarity. You saw the man you killed. You knew when you had won. This distinction mattered to Richthofen more than ideology. He was not driven by hatred of the enemy. He rarely spoke of them at all. He spoke of aircraft performance, of mistakes, of angles. Killing was not personal. It was procedural. This detachment did not make him less lethal. It made him unstoppable. The red aircraft multiplied. Soon it was not just his own plane, but his entire squadron marked by color and coordination. They moved like predators, descending on isolated targets, vanishing before retaliation could form. Losses among his unit were lower than average. Success rates higher. His approach worked. And so the pressure increased. Germany did not need another pilot. It needed a myth that could fly faster than reality. Richthofen was summoned for photographs, interviews, ceremonies. His victories were counted obsessively. Each new kill was a headline. Each headline fed expectation. He felt it tightening. The air war did not pause for celebration. Fatigue accumulated invisibly. Long hours at altitude strained the body. Cold stiffened muscles. Noise eroded nerves. The line between alertness and exhaustion blurred slowly. 10 soothingly. Then came the bullet. It struck his head during combat, fracturing his skull. Blood filled his goggles. He landed barely conscious. Doctors spoke in careful language. Brain trauma, concussion, prolonged rest advised, possibly permanent damage. They did not know how the brain healed under such conditions. They knew enough to be afraid. Richthofen did not listen. He returned to the air too soon. Headaches followed him into the cockpit. Dizziness arrived without warning. Moments of disorientation interrupted instincts that had once been flawless. His reaction time slowed. His tolerance for risk subtly shifted. The hunter was no longer whole, but the myth could not afford imperfection. The regime needed him flying, needed the red aircraft in the sky, needed victories to counterbalance hunger, grief, and the creeping realization that the war was being lost. Richthofen understood this without being told. He did not protest. He did not complain. He flew. Each mission now carried something new, not fear of death, but awareness of decline. He knew his own methods well enough to recognize deviation. He chased when he should have waited, descended lower than doctrine advised, stayed longer in engagements that once would have ended sooner. The sky noticed. On April 21st, 1918, the air was thin and pale. Richthofen pursued an enemy aircraft at low altitude, breaking the rules he himself had written. The ground rose fast beneath him. Gunfire erupted from the air, from the earth. A single bullet entered his body and tore through him. Who fired it remains uncertain. An enemy pilot seeking revenge. A machine gunner firing blindly from the ground. The war erased the answer. Richthofen landed hard, his red aircraft torn and silent. He was dead before help arrived. The sky reclaimed its most disciplined predator without ceremony. What followed was unexpected. Allied soldiers recovered his body and buried him with full military honors. Flags, salutes, respect offered across enemy lines. Not for ideology, for mastery. They understood what he had been. A man who had learned to kill in a space where killing was new. The war did not pause. Aircraft continued to fall. Pilots burned. Parachute still, rare saved few. Aviation accelerated rapidly, absorbing lessons paid for by men like Richthofen. Machines grew faster. Tactics grew colder. Individual dominance gave way to formation warfare, to systems rather than aces. The age Richthofen embodied ended almost as quickly as it began, but the psychological legacy endured. The color red in the sky had proven that visibility could dominate as effectively as concealment. That fear could be engineered. That war was not only mechanical, but mental. Future doctrines would remember this long after his name faded from headlines. Propaganda preserved the myth. Richthofen was remembered as a knight of the air, a relic of honor in an otherwise industrial slaughter. The truth was harsher and more revealing. He was not romantic, it was more than a man who adapted faster than morality, who understood the rules of a new domain before anyone else had time to question them. He did not invent aerial warfare, he exposed its essence. The sky was not purer than the trenches. It was simply more honest. When war learned to fly, it did not bring grace with it. It brought the same hunger for efficiency, the same indifference to life only faster, higher, and without escape. And Richthofen, painted red against gray, was the moment humanity realized that even the sky could become a slaughterhouse. The myth outlived the man because the century needed it to. After Richthofen's death, the war continued its upward spiral of efficiency. Aircraft stopped being extensions of individual skill and became instruments of doctrine. The sky filled with formations rather than lone hunters. Radios replaced hand signals. Commands replaced instinct. The individual ace became less important than the system that produced him. Killing was no longer personal, it was optimized. This was the future Richthofen never lived to see, and yet he haunted it. Every pilot who climbed into a cockpit after 1918 inherited a sky that had been stripped of innocence by men like him. The early illusion that the air might be a cleaner battlefield was gone. Aviation had proven itself capable of the same cruelty as the trenches, only faster, quieter, and farther from witnesses. The First World War did not just invent air combat, it invented distance as a moral anesthetic. Richthofen belonged to the brief moment before that distance fully took hold. He killed close enough to see faces. He fought when the sky was still intimate. when victory required proximity, when a mistake meant immediate death without mediation. That intimacy shaped him on, destroyed him. In the years after the war, his image was polished relentlessly. Paintings softened his expression, stories exaggerated chivalry. The Red Aircraft became legend, detached from the exhaustion, pain, and degradation that had defined his final months. Nations prefer heroes who die cleanly. Germany, humiliated and broken, clung to such figures desperately. But beneath the myth lay a warning the century would ignore. Richthofen had not been reckless by nature. He had been careful, systematic, controlled. Yet even he was worn down by the pace of mechanized killing. Even he broke his own rules. Even he became vulnerable to a system that demanded constant output from a human body that could not sustain it. This pattern would repeat. In the decades that followed, air forces around the world refined what Richthofen had improvised. Pilots would fly higher, faster, farther. Technology would insulate them from danger until it didn't. The sky would become crowded with machines capable of ending cities in minutes. The distance between killer and killed would stretch until faces disappeared entirely. But the psychological pressure would remain, the need to perform, the expectation of invulnerability, the refusal to acknowledge limits. Richthofen's collapse under that pressure was not unique. It was prophetic. He was one of the first to discover that modern war consumes its specialists as ruthlessly as its masses. That expertise does not grant immunity. That excellence invites exploitation. The Red Aircraft was not just a personal choice. It was a signal to enemies, to allies, to the system itself. It said, "I am visible, I am effective, I am still here." And the system responded by demanding more. More emissions, more victories, more symbolism. Until there was nothing left to take. The question of who killed Richthofen remains unresolved because it does not matter. His death was not an accident. It was an outcome, a convergence of exhaustion, injury, pressure, and a battlefield that had evolved beyond the human capacity to dominate it alone. Whether the bullet came from the air or the ground, the war had already claimed him. The Allied soldiers who buried him with honors understood this instinctively. Their gesture was not romanticism, it was recognition. They honored not an enemy ideology, but a fellow participant in a brutal experiment that no one truly controlled. They had all flown in a sky that had learned how to kill. Richthofen's story endures because it marks a threshold. Before him, air combat was improvisation. After him, it was doctrine. Before him, war in the sky was novelty. After him, it was inevitability. He stands at the intersection of curiosity and catastrophe, where humanity first realized that no domain, land, sea, or air would remain untouched by industrialized violence. The century that followed would prove him right again and again. Bombers would erase cities. Fighters would duel at supersonic speed. Drones would kill without pilots ever leaving the ground. Each step forward traced its lineage back to those first fragile machines and the men who flew them without parachutes, without certainty, without escape. Richthofen did not foresee this future, but he helped create it. Not as a villain, not as a hero. This pattern would repeat. In the decades that followed, air forces around the world refined what Richthofen had improvised. Pilots would fly higher, faster, farther. Technology would insulate them from danger until it didn't. The sky would become crowded with machines capable of ending cities in minutes. The distance between killer and killed would stretch until faces disappeared entirely. But the psychological pressure would remain, the need to perform, the expectation of invulnerability, the refusal to acknowledge limits. Richthofen's collapse under that pressure was not unique. It was prophetic. He was one of the first to discover that modern war consumes its specialists as ruthlessly as its masses. That expertise does not grant immunity. That excellence invites exploitation. The Red Aircraft was not just a personal choice. It was a signal to enemies, to allies, to the system itself. It said, "I am visible, I am effective, I am still here." And the system responded by demanding more. More emissions, more victories, more symbolism. Until there was nothing left to take. The question of who killed Richthofen remains unresolved because it does not matter. His death was not an accident. It was an outcome, a convergence of exhaustion, injury, pressure, and a battlefield that had evolved beyond the human capacity to dominate it alone. Whether the bullet came from the air or the ground, the war had already claimed him. The Allied soldiers who buried him with honors understood this instinctively. Their gesture was not romanticism. It was recognition. They honored not an enemy ideology, but a fellow participant in a brutal experiment that no one truly controlled. They had all flown in a sky that had learned how to kill. Richthofen's story endures because it marks a threshold. Before him, air combat was improvisation. After him, it was doctrine. Before him, war in the sky was novelty. After him, it was inevitability. He stands at the intersection of curiosity and catastrophe, where humanity first realized that no domain, sea or air would remain untouched by industrialized violence. The century that followed would prove him right again and again. Bombers would erase cities. Fighters would duel at supersonic speed. Drones would kill without pilots ever leaving the ground. Each step forward traced its lineage back to those first fragile machines and the men who flew them without parachutes, without certainty, without escape. Richthofen did not foresee this future, but he helped create it. Not as a villain, not as a hero, as a man who adapted faster than conscience could follow. The sky does not remember honor. It remembers outcomes. And the outcome of the Red Baron's life was this. The moment humanity learned that war, once it finds a new dimension, will master it completely or consume those who arrive first. The sky closed over him, and the century moved on. What Richthofen left behind was not a legacy of honor, but a blueprint of transformation. War had entered a realm where the human body was no longer the measure of combat. Speed outpaced reflex. Altitude outpaced breath. Distance outpaced empathy. The air became the first place where killing could be both intimate and detached, where you saw your enemy clearly, yet never touched him. That contradiction would define everything that followed. The Red Baron's era was brief because it could not last. Individual mastery was incompatible with industrial war. The same systems that elevated Richthofen also ensured that no one like him could endure for long. Once the sky became crowded with machines, once formations replaced lone hunters, once doctrine replaced instinct, the age of the ace was already dying. But memory is stubborn. History prefers symbols over systems, faces over processes. Richthofen survived in memory because he was singular. A name, a color, a silhouette against gray clouds. He allowed the war in the air to be imagined as personal, even noble, when in truth it was already becoming mechanical and merciless. This distortion mattered. By mythologizing the early pilots, the world softened the reality of what air power truly meant. It delayed reckoning. It allowed later generations to believe that technology might civilize war rather than accelerate it. That belief would collapse spectacularly in the decades to come. The First World War taught humanity that the sky was no sanctuary. The Second would teach it that the sky could erase cities. Between those lessons lies Richthofen, neither innocent nor monstrous, but transitional. A man whose instincts belonged to hunting, whose skills belonged to machines, and whose fate belonged to a system that had no space for restraint. He did not hesitate to kill, but he did not celebrate it either. That ambiguity is what makes him endure. He was not driven by ideology. He did not speak of enemies as evil. He spoke of angles, timing, altitude. He represents the moment when war stopped asking why and began asking only how efficiently. That shift defines the modern world. Every pilot who climbed into a cockpit after him inherited a sky already stripped of romance. Even those who flew in later, wars protected by parachutes, guided by radar, insulated by technology, felt the same pressure he did. Perform, survive, repeat. The system rewards success until the body fails. The Red Baron failed not because he lacked skill, but because skill was no longer enough. His head wound was not just physical. It symbolized the collision between human limits and mechanical demands. The war needed him whole. His body could not comply. That imbalance killed him as surely as any bullet. In the end, the color red faded back into gray. The sky absorbed another life. Without comment, the machines moved on. The war ended. The myths settled, and humanity stepped into a century where the air would never again be neutral. Richthofen's story is not about glory, it is about acceleration. About how quickly war adapts and how slowly wisdom follows. About how new domains promise clarity and deliver only faster destruction. About how the first to master a new battlefield are often consumed by it before anyone learns how to survive there. He did not paint the sky red because he wanted to be remembered. He did it because fear is a weapon, and he understood weapons better than sentiment. The sky remembers nothing of him now. No color, no name. Only the lesson remains. When war finds a new place to grow, it will not wait for humanity to be ready. It will climb there immediately, carrying old instincts into unfamiliar heights, and those who arrive first will pay the highest price for teaching it how to kill. Manfred von Richthofen was not the greatest pilot of his time. He was the proof that the sky had already become a battlefield, and once war learns to fly, it never lands again.